What if the most dangerous weapon on Ukraine's battlefield is no longer a missile, a tank, or even artillery, but a system that never stops watching? Across several parts of the front, Russian troops are being found, tracked, and hit before they can settle, hide, or sometimes even understand they have been exposed. At first, these may look like separate drone strikes, but taken together, they suggest something much bigger. This is not only about a few FPV attacks or another night of battlefield footage from Ukraine. It may be the sign of a new combat model, one that connects surveillance, target tracking, rapid strikes, and deeper attacks into one continuous chain. That is what makes this story so serious. Because from Lyman to the area near Sloviansk, and even farther into Crimea, the pattern points to more than local success. It points to a battlefield where movement is becoming easier to detect, harder to protect, and far more costly than before. Stay with military force because the real question is not only what Ukraine is hitting, but how this way of fighting could reshape the next phase of the war. Lyman is becoming a place where Russia cannot simply mass troops, move closer, and hope pressure alone will open the line. What gives Ukraine an edge here is not one spectacular strike, but a constant presence in the sky. Several drone crews can work at the same time, watch different angles, and pass targets from one team to another without losing contact. That changes the meaning of approach routes, tree lines, and open ground. A Russian assault group may still believe it is moving under cover, but the real problem starts much earlier. At the moment someone above has already seen the route, fixed the movement, and kept following it. That is why this sector now looks less like a normal clash at the trench edge, and more like a controlled outer defense zone built in the air. What matters most in that system is continuity. A single drone sighting is one thing. A layered watch that does not break is something else entirely. Once several crews share coverage, blind spots shrink, and time starts working against the attacking force. Soldiers who pause too long, shift direction, or gather near a line of cover can be marked before they ever touch the main defensive belt. This makes surprise much harder to achieve. It also means Ukraine does not need to wait for a full assault to form before acting. The battle can begin while Russian infantry is still trying to approach in fragments, and that is where the pressure starts to multiply. This also helps explain why Lyman remains costly for Russia, even when pressure continues. The issue is not only whether Russian troops reach a position. The issue is how much exposure they suffer before getting there. When drones stay overhead in large numbers, every extra minute in the approach zone increases risk. An infantry group can be spotted early. A support vehicle can be followed. A weapon system moving behind it can be hit later by another crew. The result is not just damage, but delay, confusion, and broken timing. That matters because offensive action depends on rhythm. Units need to arrive together, push together, and react together. If one part is pinned down early and another is forced to slow or turn away, then the assault begins to lose shape before real contact even starts. That is why constant aerial presence is now doing more than observation. It is shaping the fight before the first decisive exchange on the ground. In practical terms, Ukraine is turning air awareness into battlefield control. The goal is not only to destroy, but to deny easy access, reduce freedom of movement, and make each Russian step more expensive than it first appears. This fits a wider pattern around Lyman, where pressure continues, but clean breakthroughs remain hard to secure because every approach can become visible, and every visible approach can quickly become a target. And when that pattern repeats for hours, local pressure starts turning into wider operational strain. Once that happens, the story grows beyond infantry alone, because the same logic can also be used against the vehicles, guns, and other systems that keep an assault moving forward. Ukraine is not using drones here as a support weapon. It is using them as a tool to manage the battlefield. The source footage makes that clear because the targets are not limited to assault troops moving toward the line. The same network is shown tracking a cannon, an IFV involved in vehicle recovery, and enemy drones searching for Ukrainian pilot positions. That matters because it shows a wider purpose. Ukraine is not only trying to kill what is in front of it, it is trying to expose, slow, and break the systems that help Russia move, fire, and see. Once one drone layer watches the field and another strikes what it finds, the fight stops being about isolated hits and starts looking like controlled pressure across the sector. And that wider pressure leads directly to a battlefield Russia is struggling to cross. The most important change is that one aerial network can now attack several functions at once. It can spot infantry in motion, mark vehicles on approach routes, and follow the links that connect those targets to a larger combat system. A gun is not only a gun, it is a source of fire support. An IFV is not only armor. It may be carrying troops, recovering damaged vehicles, or helping keep a route open. A drone control position matters even more because it acts like the eyes and hands of another strike chain. So when Ukrainian operators hit these points, they do more than remove single assets. They reduce the enemy's ability to react, observe, and keep pressure steady. That is why even small targets begin to matter more once they are understood as parts of the same machine. And once that machine starts losing parts, the damage spreads far beyond the first strike. The source also shows why vehicles like the UAZ Bukanka, improvised civilian transport, and other light platforms matter in this war. On paper, they do not look strategic. In practice, they carry personnel, equipment, batteries, antennas, and the small loads that keep frontline activity alive. If those vehicles are found and struck, the damage spreads farther than the blast itself. It can interrupt movement between tree lines, delay the arrival of operators, and force Russian units to spend more time hiding or waiting for a replacement. The same logic applies to equipment around UAV teams. When two soldiers near a drone position are hit and the control antenna is destroyed, the loss is not only human. A node in the Russian reconnaissance and attack loop goes silent. That is where battlefield control becomes more important than a simple body count. And when the enemy begins to lose both mobility and vision, every further push becomes harder to organize. What emerges from all this is a different picture of modern war. Ukraine is not just meeting Russian attacks at the point of contact. It is trying to shape what reaches that point, what supports it, and what survives long enough to matter. That is why drone warfare here looks less like a collection of dramatic clips and more like a methodical effort to disrupt the enemy's full operating environment. Once guns, recovery vehicles, supply transport, and UAV control points all fall into the same kill chain, Russia faces a deeper problem than local losses. It begins to lose coherence. Movement becomes harder, fire support becomes less reliable, and situational awareness starts to thin out across the sector. And once that wider system is under strain, the cost of pushing more armor into battle becomes far easier to understand. Russia may be attacking with more force this spring, but more force does not mean more freedom to move. That is the real problem inside this phase of the war. The footage and descriptions in this source show Russian forces increasing pressure, sending more armored vehicles forward, and trying to create faster breakthroughs as spring begins. That wider pattern also matches outside battlefield tracking, which indicates that the new spring and summer push has begun. Yet Russian advances have remained limited, and in some areas have slowed under continued Ukrainian resistance. That gap matters. On paper, more armor should help an attacker build momentum, protect assault troops, and force openings in a defensive line. But on a battlefield covered by constant aerial watch, those same vehicles also create larger signatures, clearer movement corridors, and more chances for Ukrainian crews to find them before they reach the point where armor is supposed to matter most. So the return of heavier platforms is not automatically bringing back true mobility. In many cases, it is increasing exposure at the exact moment Russia is trying to speed up the pace of the fight, and that is where the cost of this offensive begins to rise. That cost becomes much clearer once the role of FPV and bomber drones is placed at the center of the picture. The deeper issue is that these drones are not only destroying vehicles, they are attacking the rhythm that mechanized warfare depends on. An armored push needs sequence, spacing, and timing. Vehicles must move in order. Supporting fire must stay close enough to matter. Infantry must get out at the right place and the right moment. Once one machine is damaged, another is forced to stop, and a third has to change direction, the whole attack begins to lose form. The source describes dozens of heavy vehicles destroyed during March by FPV drones and heavy bombers, and it links those losses to a decline in Russian offensive potential. That point matters more than a simple count of destroyed equipment. The deeper effect is compression. Assaults slow down. Gaps appear. Units arrive unevenly. Some crews hesitate, while others move too early and expose themselves. A mechanized attack can survive damage, but it struggles much more when it loses timing, because once tempo breaks, armor begins to act like separated metal instead of one fighting system. That is why the image of a burning vehicle tells only a small part of the story, and the larger story sits inside the broken timing behind it. Open source reporting supports that broader logic. One Ukrainian drone brigade said in February that it had destroyed 20 Russian tanks since the start of 2026, roughly the equivalent of 2 tank companies, and it credited FPV and heavy bomber drones as the main tools behind those strikes. That figure should still be treated carefully because it comes from one side of the war, but it fits a larger and credible battlefield pattern. Ukraine is not trying to answer every armored push with expensive missiles or massive counterattacks. It is repeatedly using cheaper unmanned systems to raise the survival cost of every Russian move. That changes the meaning of armor. A tank is no longer judged only by protection or gun range. It is judged by how long it can remain useful under constant observation from above. If enough vehicles are found in transit, hit before deployment, or forced to halt under pressure, then adding more armor does not solve the problem. It can simply feed more targets into the same kill chain. That leads to the most important conclusion in this part of the story. The real issue is not only that Russia is losing vehicles. The bigger issue is that mechanized tempo itself is being squeezed. Every additional vehicle creates another chance for detection. Every new assault wave gives Ukrainian drone crews another opportunity to break order before contact becomes decisive. That does not mean armor has disappeared from modern war. It means armor now survives only when it can move inside a system strong enough to protect awareness, timing, and spacing. And when that system weakens, a larger offensive can still look threatening on paper while moving far more slowly in reality, which is why the battlefield then begins to favor smaller, quieter infiltration methods that try to avoid the same level of exposure. Near Sloviansk, the war is showing a different Russian adaptation, but it is not producing the safer approach Moscow likely wants. Instead of relying only on larger mechanized pushes, Russian forces are also sending small infantry groups into the gaps between Ukrainian positions, using darkness, vegetation, and abandoned cover to move in short steps. Some groups are guided by drones that help them find routes. That method reduces the signature of a large assault. But it does not remove exposure. It only shifts the problem from mass to detection, and that is where Ukraine has changed its own way of hunting. This tactic matters because it reflects learning under pressure. Russian units appear to understand that bigger formations attract faster fire, clearer drone observation, and easier targeting. Smaller teams can spread out, pause in concealment, and try to slip into what Ukrainian reporting calls the interpositional space between defensive positions. Once there, they may wait in dugouts, trenches, pits, or ruined structures for orders or reinforcements. On paper, this is a more careful way to advance. In practice, it still depends on one fragile hope: that those hiding places will not be found before the group is ready to act. And that hope is becoming harder to protect. Ukraine's answer has been to widen the search area rather than wait at the line itself. That is the key difference. If Russian troops shrink the size of the assault element, Ukrainian drone teams try to expand the zone of visibility around it. Reporting from this sector describes shelters and infantry positions being discovered and struck soon after fighters disperse into cover. That suggests the danger no longer begins when a group stands up to attack. It begins when that group stops moving and believes it has disappeared. The smaller unit may be harder to see at first, but once found, it has less protection and less ability to recover. That is where adaptation starts turning back into attrition. So the real paradox near Sloviansk is simple. Russia is reducing the size of its assault groups to survive longer, while Ukraine is expanding surveillance to make even those smaller groups huntable targets. That does not mean infiltration has no value. It can still create uncertainty and keep pressure on weak points. But it has not solved the deeper problem of battlefield exposure. If constant drone watch remains in place, then smaller formations may avoid the signature of a column, yet still fail to gain the staying power of a breakthrough. And once that becomes clear, the same search and strike cycle can also be pushed toward rear positions and control nodes deeper behind the line. What makes this part of the story so important is that Ukraine is no longer using drones as separate strike tools, but as a connected system that can hit the front line and the deeper rear at the same time. That logic begins with small targets that may not look strategic at first. A UAZ Bukanka, a drone crew, a control antenna, or a launch position can seem minor when viewed alone. But on a drone battlefield, those are the nerves of the system. They help Russian units see, guide, communicate, and react. If those links are broken, the damage spreads beyond one vehicle or one team. Movement becomes slower. Observation becomes weaker. Strikes become less precise. That is why attacks on operators and antennas matter so much. They do not just remove men and equipment. They blind part of the network and reduce the enemy's ability to coordinate what comes next. And once that same logic is applied farther back, the scale of the problem changes completely. That larger scale becomes visible in Crimea, where the same chain appears to move from frontline disruption to deep operational pressure. According to Ukrainian statements released after the night of April 1st to 2nd, forces linked to the Unmanned Systems Branch and military intelligence struck targets at Kurovsky airfield in occupied Crimea. Ukraine said the strike hit infrastructure used for Orion drones, destroyed an An-72P aircraft, and disabled a P-37 radar known as Sword. Some Ukrainian reporting also said 4 Orion drones were destroyed there. These claims should still be treated with caution because full independent confirmation remains limited. Even so, the pattern is consistent with the logic already visible at the front. Ukraine is not only trying to stop individual assaults. It is trying to damage the reconnaissance, transport, and air surveillance assets that help Russia sustain pressure across a wider battle space. And when rear assets begin falling into the same targeting cycle, the battlefield starts to look less local and far more connected. The air layer adds another important piece, because drones are now being used not only to hunt on the ground but also to attack low-flying threats in the sky. The transcript describes a sequence in which 7 aerial targets were intercepted. That exact number in one clip cannot be independently verified here, so it should be treated as source-based footage rather than a fully confirmed count. Still, the wider trend is real. Ukraine's own defense figures say the interception rate against drones in March 2026 rose above 90%, despite growing attack volume. That suggests low-altitude drone defense is becoming a larger part of the war, not a side story. So, the same technology that finds infantry, tracks vehicles, and strikes command nodes is also moving into the fight for the air just above the battlefield. And that is what turns scattered drone footage into evidence of a much larger shift. The larger shift is that Ukraine appears to be linking the front line, the middle zone, and the deep rear into one combat logic. That may be the most serious point in this entire story. A battlefield like that is no longer controlled only by firepower at the point of contact. It is controlled by who can see first, pass data faster, and hit the right node before the enemy can adapt. That is why this is bigger than FPV clips. It is about a model of war in which drones do not simply destroy targets. They reshape how space itself is contested. And that is the point where the next phase of the war begins to look very different. What stands out here is not just that Ukraine hit more targets, but that it is turning drone warfare into a system that can shape the fight from front to rear. At Lyman, that system made approach routes dangerous long before Russian troops could reach the line. Near Sloviansk, it made even small infiltration teams vulnerable once they stopped, hid, or tried to build a foothold. And in Crimea, it pointed to something even larger, because pressure was no longer limited to soldiers and vehicles near contact, but reached assets linked to surveillance, transport, and air control. That is why this story matters. The side that sees first, shares data faster, and strikes the right node at the right moment may now have a bigger advantage than the side that simply sends more men or more armor. The real question now is how far this model can go, and how quickly Russia can adapt before more parts of the battlefield become equally exposed. If this kind of warfare keeps expanding, the next phase of the war may be decided by networks, not numbers. Subscribe to Military Force for more deep battlefield analysis, and stay with the channel as this story continues to develop.